Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and today for your weekly top 5 video, we are going over my top 5 ships that make absolutely no sense for one reason or another. Now, to be clear, just here at the beginning, that doesn't mean these ships are bad. In fact, I do quite like most of the ships that are on this list. But what it does mean is that either looking at the tech line or just some of the design choices made by Wargaming, some aspect about the ship just makes zero sense. And of course, that's on a ship-by-ship basis. So let's just go ahead and get right on into it. But if you do find yourself enjoying this video at some point in it, make sure you drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz before you click off of it. But anyway, let's go ahead and get on into it at number 5, which is the Tier 8 premium Japanese battleship, the Key. So the Key is a very interesting example of how Wargaming interprets historical designs. So if you don't know, the Key is actually the sister ship to the Amagi. You see, the two ships are extremely similar in most cases. I mean, they are sister ships after all. When it comes to, the guns and the secondary mounts and stuff, there are some differences here and there, but for the most part, again, they're fairly similar. But where the big differences come is when it comes down to the armor. You see, the Key is the battleship version of the Amagi. The Amagi is the battlecruiser version of, well, the Amagi class. I believe 2 designs were drawn up by the Japanese Navy back in the day. There's a battlecruiser version of this design and a battleship version, or one might be a conversion to a battlecruiser one way or another. Something like that. So, I mean, it makes sense, you'd want to have the battlecruiser version of a design and then the battleship version of a design. Perfect idea for a premium ship variant of a ship that already exists in game, right? Well, the kicker is that, you see, the Key, the battleship version of the design, is actually the weaker of the two when it comes to the armor. The Key's armor is nowhere near as well protected as the Amagi's. The Citadel slope armor on the interior of the Key is actually much thinner. The Amagi Citadel slopes, I believe, are like 93 to 105 millimeters thick. The Key's is around 38 millimeters thick for some reason. So it's actually quite easy to Citadel the Key in comparison to the Amagi, which is darn near nigh impossible to Citadel. Like, literally, I don't think I've Citadeled an Amagi in a hot minute. I really cannot remember the last time I've done so. So that doesn't make any sense. But then the Amagi, which again is the battlecruiser, is slower than the Key, which is the battleship. So again, that doesn't really make much sense. Battlecruisers, the whole idea is that armament of a battleship, speed of a of a cruiser. But yet here the Key is faster than the Amagi. So that just why Wargaming? Now, to Wargaming's credit, this is before we had, the traditional battlecruiser design in game, where of course we have like the Schlieffen line and the St. Vincent line, where of course there's a big difference between the armor of those lines and of the battleship lines. And what's really weird too is that we got the Japanese battlecruiser line with the Bungo line, and they look pretty dang similar to Amagi, right? But of course, for some reason, we didn't get a reshuffling of the Japanese battleship tech tree, because the Japanese battleship tech tree, if you look at it, it's a alternating design for the midsection of the line, where like you have a battleship, then a battlecruiser, then another battlecruiser, then a battleship. So they keep swapping back and forth between battleships and battlecruisers in the tech line, but they didn't straighten that out when we had the Japanese battlecruisers brought in. So it's just a lot of weird. I mean, to be fair, the Japanese Navy, with of course the naval trees and stuff, they were jumping through some hoops to keep some ships around and stuff. So that is very much true of that time period. But yeah, and like the Key, again, this is a ship that I do very much like. You get the torpedoes. You actually have some pretty decent secondaries on the Key if you want to build into it. And she's also one of the few Japanese battleships in game that actually has like good AA. So that's also a nice pickup for the key. And if you're lucky enough to have an older key and have the Kobayashi camo on your key, you have a really good credit printer too, because now you have that, nice boosted economy on your key all the time now. And the Amagi is a perfectly fine ship as well. I quite like the Amagi. The Amagi for me was one of the highlights of the Japanese battleship tech tree. The grind up it was a really good ship when I went through it back in the day, and it still is today. Having 10 16-inch guns at tier 8 is a pretty solid hit. Back in 2019 when I went through the jet, no, I went through that in like 2018. Yeah, back in 2018, still in 2024. It's a nice set of guns either way. So yeah, that's the key. Just a really weird design choice for wargaming when, again, the battle cruiser is slower and tankier than the battleship variant of, yeah, it's just oddities all around. All right, going on down to number 4, we have the tier 10 French battleship, the Republique. Now, the Republique is really, really odd when you look at the rest of the French battleship tech line, because literally from the beginning on up, the whole trend is you have a large number of smaller caliber guns for your tier in these weird, quad turrets. That's the thing going up to the Leon. And then you kind of reset with the Richelieu, where you have the 2 turrets with the 4 guns per turret, but they're 15-inch guns now, decent sized guns for your tier. So it's like, okay. And then you get to the Alsace, and it's like, okay, we've bolted a 3rd turret onto your ship. Now you have 12 15-inch guns at tier 9, and 15-inch guns at tier 9 are, of course, smaller than your average tier 9 battleships guns, especially when the French battleships came out. And then you get to the Republic, where it's like, okay, here's a very weird French Grafspee with 8 17.5-inch guns. Okay. It's just like, wait. We were going in a direction. The rest of the line pointed toward that direction. And then at the last second, we just take a left turn and we get a really big French Grafspee. Now, again, I do quite like the Republic a lot. Having a sub 20-second reload on 8 17.5-inch guns at tier 10 is pretty darn good. Now, unfortunately, you don't really get, the ability to overmatch a whole lot. Like, yeah, you can overmatch 30 millimeters, and that's pretty good. But of course, you can't overmatch, 32 millimeters or anything like that. But that's made up for by the reload time. Because again, if you full build into it, sub 20-second reload on these 17.5-inch guns with the French AP and all that jazz. So it does bite pretty hard when it does connect to the enemy ship. And also with the good reload, if you can overmatch whatever it is that you're shooting at, you can just swap over to HE, and with the quick reload, just absolutely melt whatever it is that you are trying to burn down. And of course, she does have secondaries that can get out to 12.5 kilometers, but they aren't really terribly accurate in my experience. They also don't really survive that long when you get into some brawling situations. And plus, the French armor scheme does leave a lot to be desired when it comes to tankiness, so you do get farmed down quite easily by anything that can pen 32 millimeters of armor, which is most cruisers by tier 10 standards. So it's just a real oddity in the line. So I could see maybe doing a really big Richelieu with the 17.5-inch guns, on the forward portion of the deck. But just, doing the whole Grafspee thing, it's just, so odd. And it's really odd that they haven't finished the line, per se, and given us, an Alsace with another turret bolted onto it, which would be pretty scary. I mean, I guess we got that with the Colombo, right? With her 16 15-inch guns. And that was really funny. Back in the day, the argument was, well, what do you expect them to do? Give you a battleship with 16 15-inch guns? A few years later, here we have a Colombo with 16 15-inch guns with SAP at tier 10. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, I did. So again, nothing but love for the Republic. Just a really, really weird design choice when, again, the whole line was pointing to something else, and then boom, we get a French Grafspee, a mega Grafspee, right? All right, going down to number 3, we have the tier 7 British premium battleship, the Rodney. So the Rodney is, and I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority on this, but it's just such a weird choice that they made here with the Rodney, given her tier and her matchmaking bracket and the choice they went with her. So Rodney is, of course, the sister ship to the Nelson. Now, the Nelson, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is not a very durable ship. The hull armor is not that great at all. She eats pins from just about every angle. She's a very old ship in game, so everyone knows, her weaknesses and stuff. And most players don't fall for the bait that is your armored broadside. So you tend to get bullied a lot in the Nelson. Now, to make up for that, the Nelson has the super heal. A la the Conqueror, where she can reprint, a good chunk of her HP, like 2/3 of her HP, if she really wants to. So that's what helps makes the Nelson, a pretty viable and really darn good Tier 7 premium battleship. The Rodney, well, Wargaming took the Nelson and said, okay, we're going to tune this to be a close-in brawler. We're going to give it the Soviet battleship dispersion gimmick. We're going to give her historical torpedo tubes in the bow, which, to their credit, that is a nice trick to have up your sleeve, engine boost, and again, the 16-inch guns. Well, all that's nice, but they gave her a standard heal on top of all that. Well, I think it's mildly improved, but it's not enough in my opinion, because the truth of the matter is that Tier 7 ships are very often double up tiered to Tier 9. And definitely at Tier 9, most of the other battleships in the matches, they can absolutely go straight through your bow armor when it comes to the Rodney. But unlike the Nelson, you don't have the super heal to counter that. And you're also tuned to be a close-in battleship with the Soviet battleship dispersion gimmick, which, by the way, if you haven't played the Soviet battleships, the Soviet battleship dispersion gimmick doesn't really work all that consistently well. In my Rodney review, I am like 7 kilometers away from, I think, like a Colorado or a Constellation. I fire, and like half the shells are going in the water from 7 kilometers away, which is like, wait, hold up a second. The whole point of this gimmick is to get closer to the target so you get better dispersion, but we're still throwing half of the shells in the water from 7 kilometers away. Yeah, and again, if you haven't played the Kremlin line, it's like that. It's like that there too. So anyway, it's far too weak, in my opinion, to be a reliable brawler in normal Tier 7 random battles matchmaking. Now, of course, if you're in like ranked battles or something where it's fixed matchmaking to where you're only seeing other Tier 7 ships, she is actually quite good. But for a random battle ship, no, it doesn't make sense. If they had made this ship a Tier 8 with a 32mm bow and stern plating and left it as is, I think this would have been a fantastic ship, because the ability to bounce everything but 18.1 inch and above guns would have been perfect. Then you would have had a really, really good close-in brawler, close-in Nelson brawler. But I think they were too scared of having another Linen situation on their hands, so they unfortunately kept her at Tier 7. So yeah, again, just the design choices. Really the tier setting is what I'm talking about here. That just doesn't make sense in my mind, at least. And I know I'm kind of in the minority on this, but that's what I believe about the Rodney. Alright, going our way down now to number 2, we have the Tier 7 Tech Line British battleship, the King George V. So, the King George V, how does this not make sense, Sealord? It fits in with the line. It's an HE-spamming battleship, like the rest of the British battleship line. It's fairly squishy, like the rest of the British battleship line. What's weird about the King George V? Well, you see, the real-life King George V class battleships were not squishy. They, in fact, historically had some of the heaviest and best armor schemes of World War II. Like the King George V class battleships, they had armor up there with the Yamato. That's how thick these ships' armor schemes were. And yet, in-game, here we have a class of very, very squishy battleships that, as, again, most of you are very well aware of, are no problem to farm down if you have HE with good pins or large enough guns, or improved pin angles or whatever have you that you need to get through the King George V's very thin armor. And what's really weird is that, Wargaming obviously knows this. In fact, they actually tried a design out along those lines with the original Duke of York design. The original Duke of York was just this, armored titan of a battleship that did not have a heel. They gave it, godly armor, but no heel. And obviously that just led to it getting farmed down, because, again, who cares about armor when HE exists in this game, So they kind of tried to make it work, but they didn't. Again, kind of like the Rodney, you could have moved the King George V up to tier 8, given it better armor, given it more accurate guns. I think you would have been able to, have a pretty good little, more historically accurate King George V there at tier 8. But instead we got the Monarch, which, does get the 32 millimeter plating, which is kind of nice, but still doesn't have that fantastic of armor. But she has recently gotten her super heal, so that does certainly help her out there a lot more at tier 8 with the Monarch. But unfortunately, the King George V is still just known as a super squishy tier 7 British battleship. Now, again, the King George V is actually, I believe, pretty good in game just from a gameplay point of view. Like, she's got great real time on her 14-inch gun. She has that nice British BBHE, but of course the trade-off for having a nice set of guns and nice HE is that she is of course very, very squishy. So again, from a historical point of view, King George V in game does not make any sense whatsoever, and it's kind of odd because wargaming does usually try to incorporate key elements of a ship's design from their historical design point, but for whatever reason, unfortunately, King George V was kind of left out to dry when it came to that. All right, finally at number 1, we have the Tier 9 Premium American Destroyer, the Halford. Man, this ship just... I hope they never try to put another, plane on a destroyer, because this ship just is terrible. It does not make any sense from a gameplay point of view. And what's really funny, too, is that the Halford, in real life, she was fitted with a catapult aircraft. Of course, it wasn't meant for combat duties. I believe it was for, weather reconnaissance and maybe some, reconnaissance. But in real life, the Navy concluded that it just wasn't worth it. It didn't work out, and she was converted back to her standard Fletcher loadout. And I mean, in game, you have to give up a turret, one of her 5-inch turrets. You have to give up a set of torpedo launchers as well, so you're down a turret and a set of torpedo tubes, which is just terrible, because that much, those guns and those torpedoes, that's what makes the Fletcher, right? And in other cases, when you give up that set of torpedo tubes, you tend to get something a little bit better in return, like with the Kid, you get the heal. So yeah, it's just a weird combination there on a destroyer, because destroyers are some of the most active classes in game. You're not really doing a whole lot between firing your guns in a battleship, right? You're kind of sitting there waiting for your guns to reload, and just making sure you don't eat, a broadside salvo from, somebody else across the map. But destroyers, when you're not firing your guns, you're trying to spot, trying to get into a certain position, trying to get torpedoes on the enemy ships, you're trying to run torpedo interference for your team and all this stuff. So it's a very, very active style of gaming. But then you're, giving up a gun and a set of torpedo tubes to have these aircraft on your ship that you have to, leave your ship for anywhere over, a minute or two, because you gotta go fly to the other side of the map or something like that to get your planes off on target. So now your destroyer isn't really spotting or isn't really doing much, because you're out flying your planes. You have so little HP in your destroyer that you can't, really let it go off by itself. Like on the Kearsarge, you have the armor and you have the HP to go fly your planes and not really worry about too much what happens with you, as long as you aren't, on the front lines. But destroyers are supposed to be on the front lines, again, spotting and providing all these other services to their team. So it just doesn't really work, in my opinion. It's really weird that they even tried to make it happen in the first place. Hopefully this is just a test to see if it would work, and then player base would find a way to get it to work. But it's just completely pointless, in my humble opinion, and most definitely a ship that does not make any sense whatsoever. So guys, let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with this list? Do you disagree with this list? What would you add to this list? What would you remove from it? Let me know all that good stuff down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday, a wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.